the shot heard in a farmer's heart. The frost clung to the tall grass like a warning. Thomas Hale could hear the British drums before he saw the redcoats. The rhythm rolled across the Massachusetts dawn, measured, confident, unstoppable. It was the sound of an empire that had never doubted its own strength. Thomas swallowed hard and tightened his grip on the musket he'd carried from his barn only hours before. Yesterday, he had been mending fence posts. This morning, he stood on the edge of history. The green at Lexington lay quiet beneath a gray sky. Smoke from hearth fires curled lazily in the distance. But every man gathered their new piece was hanging by a thread. "Stand firm," Captain Parker had told them. "Don't fire unless fired upon." Thomas had nodded, but inside, his heart pounded like a frightened colt. Across the field, the red coats appeared through the mist, lying straight as iron rails, bayonets glinting like teeth. Years of discipline marched in those ranks. Thomas felt small, so very small. He thought of his wife, Mary, and their 2 children still asleep when he slipped out before dawn. He had kissed their foreheads in the dark and whispered promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll come home." But promises mean little when fear grips your throat. He stepped away from the line for a moment and knelt in the cold grass. "Lord," he prayed softly, "I am a farmer. I know how to plant, how to mend, how to pray over a harvest. I do not know how to fight an empire. If this cause is just, if liberty is worth this cost, then give me courage not born of anger, but of trust." He remembered the psalm his mother loved: "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." The British had both chariots and horses, cannons and ships beyond counting. The colonies had conviction and fragile unity. The drums stopped. An officer shouted a command. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a crack. No one would ever be certain who fired first. But the sound tore through the morning like lightning splitting an oak. Smoke burst. Men shouted. A musket ball struck the ground near Thomas's boots, spraying dirt against his trousers. For a heartbeat, he nearly ran. The redcoats advanced, steady and relentless. Thomas saw a young militiaman beside him freeze in terror. "Hold fast," Thomas said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice. Another volley rang out. Men fell. The line wavered. Thomas lifted his musket. His hands trembled, but not with panic. Something deeper held him steady now. A quiet resolve born not from hatred of the enemy, but from love of home. He did not fire wildly. He aimed carefully. He prayed again, not for victory, but for faithfulness. When the British pushed through Lexington and marched on toward Concord, Thomas and others regrouped along the road. Word spread quickly. Farmers left plows in fields. Blacksmiths dropped their hammers. From behind trees and stone walls, they harried the retreating column. It was not the kind of battle taught in European war manuals. It was raw, chaotic, personal. By afternoon, the unthinkable had happened. The great army that marched out in triumph now retreated toward Boston under relentless fire from ordinary men defending their soil. Thomas crouched behind a stone wall, reloading with smoke-stung eyes. His ears rang. His shoulder throbbed from recoil. But his fear no longer ruled him. As British soldiers passed within range, he saw not monsters, but men. Young, weary, far from their own homes. His heart twisted. "Lord," he murmured, "judge justly. Spare the innocent. And teach us mercy when this ends." The fighting stretched mile after mile. By the time the sun dipped low, the countryside itself seemed alive with resistance. The road to Boston had become a gauntlet. When at last the day quieted, Thomas stood among the exhausted militia. Some wept openly. Some stared in stunned silence at what had begun. 8 colonists lay dead at Lexington. Others would die before the war was done. Freedom, Thomas realized, would not come cheaply. He walked home long after dark. Mary opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes searched his face, then filled with tears when she saw he still stood. "It's begun," he said simply. She nodded. They both understood. The line between subject and citizen had been crossed that morning. Later, as Thomas sat by the hearth with his children asleep upstairs, he turned the day over in his mind. He had not felt like a hero. He had felt afraid, small, breakable, and yet he had stood. He thought again of the psalm, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Courage, he now knew, was not the absence of fear. It was obedience in its presence. The empire still loomed large. The war would stretch long and bitter. But something irreversible had happened on the road between Lexington and Concord. Ordinary men had discovered that conviction, anchored in faith, could stand against power. Thomas bowed his head beside the dying embers of the fire. "Whatever comes," he prayed, "let me be faithful." Outside, the wind moved through the trees of Massachusetts. The fields he had plowed for years lay unchanged beneath the stars. But the world had shifted. The farmer would fight again. He would march in seasons yet to come. He would bury friends and wrestle with doubt. But on that first day, when drums thundered and smoke filled the dawn, he learned the lesson that would carry him through every trial ahead. A free people must first be a faithful people. And sometimes the smallest act of courage, standing firm in the gray light of morning, echoes farther than any cannon. Historical and biblical reflection. This story is set during the opening battles of April 19, 1775, at Lexington and Concord, where colonial militia confronted British troops, historical events that marked the start of the American Revolutionary War. Thomas Hale is a fictional character representing the many ordinary farmers who stood that day. The biblical principles drawn from Psalms emphasize trust in God over military strength, reflecting the American virtues of courage, conscience, and steadfast faith under pressure.